Chapter 1. I don't know what made me do it, except loyalty. Harry had been dead only 2 weeks. But there I was, marching down Washington Avenue, decked out with tan high heels and the special green dress that looked like something Sophia Loren would have worn in the 60s. I jiggled in undignified places I'd only let Harry see. But he made me promise to wear it while traipsing down the street like a you-know-what. And so I did. But I kept my dark sunglasses on, the ones with the rhinestones. The dress exposed cleavage, which made me even more uncomfortable because men can't think about anything else when bosoms are involved, especially when it comes to a 36C and a size 4. Sort of makes you wonder what the good Lord was thinking when he created my figure. The day sweltered, and it was only 9:15 in the morning. The pavement stretching in front of the courthouse shimmered. The red, white, and blue ribbons that days earlier twirled around the trees sagged to the ground. What looked great on the 4th of July was tacky by the 7th. But everyone knows, summers in Kentucky are not for sissies. Right as I dabbed my handkerchief to the place above my bosom, Judge Henderson stepped out of the courthouse, looking dapper in a 3-piece suit. He ogled. No other word for it. His mouth popped open and his eyes fixated between my neck and my waist. I nodded once in his direction and kept going. I was 53 and a grandmother, for goodness sake. I wondered if I couldn't have fulfilled my vow to Harry by doing this at midnight. But was that fair to Harry? No. He said he wanted the smart Alex in town to get a gander at why he didn't go drinking with them. God rest his soul. I straightened my shoulders. No Burns had ever been cowardly, not since the Civil War when Cousin Dump skittered behind the oak trees near Perryville and was affixed to them like a leech on an ankle. I shouldn't have made the promise when Harry was dying, but you know how it is. You want to please when someone's hooked up to plastic tubing looking peaky. You won't play Lady Godiva for anything, he had challenged, to which I said, You're right. I'm a real lady. Oh, sure you are, he drawled back, wiggling his eyebrows. The curtains in Maylene's beauty parlor twitched, bringing me back to the present. The blush started at my clavicle, burning its way up my bare neck, my face, and then settled at my ears. All I wanted was to lay low and head for France before the holidays engulfed me. I decided to stroll down to the drugstore instead and pick up a bottle of eye drops. Since the funeral, my eyes had been nothing but red and swollen. It is one thing to shake all those hands and get a sore jaw from smiling. It is another to sleep next to a cold spot. Not that I had time to dwell on it, especially right then. The mayor's wife, her face pliable as iron, came barreling toward me. Behind Charlene's broad derriere were her look-alike daughters wearing the same pinch-nosed expression. Raylene and Kayleen may only be 15, but they already had their mother's attitude down pat. I smiled so hard my eyes crinkled. Charlene Higginbottom bobbed her head like Miss Wilderness Road back in the day. Lord knows she still does the Queen of England wave when riding in the Christmas parade. Morning, Miss Charlene, I drawled, nice and sweet, as my heart went rat-a-tat in my chest.
Why, Miss Delilah, I didn't think I'd see you this soon.
Her chin ratcheted up, then she looked down her nose, from her too close eyes.
I mean, this early in the morning.
Taking my constitutional, I replied, still walking. Her hand reached out and clutched my arm. My breath caught in my throat. Charlene tilted an eyebrow.
We were sorry to miss Mr. Morgan's service.
Her voice was as tight as my dress. Thank you, I said in my quiet Sunday voice. I didn't really know what else to say, being the widow and all. I am not good with small talk, so I started to move along when her fingers clamped down a tad tighter.
I heard it was a lovely service.
Her eyes narrowed. Yes, I said. Senator McPherson came in from Washington for the eulogy. I stared back at her. The governor, of course, spoke as well. I kept my voice cool as iced watermelon, even though my hands were perspiring from the tension. It had been quite a gathering. What with the mayor's absence a deliberate thumb-your-nose at his political opponent. Harry's letters to the editor curled Mayor Higginbottom's toes. Harry had a way with words, which was why he won that literature prize, the one for poets. Harry preferred, however, to farm. When we moved to teach at the college, he turned our yard into a garden with fruit, vegetables, and whatever else caught his fancy. It suited him, his hands feeling the dirt. He'd go to classes with it rubbed into the thighs of his chinos like he was a hired man. I kept his shirts ironed and starched, though. From the waist up, he looked natty. Footsteps behind Charlene and me sounded like the slap of wipers on a car window. Leather soles, if I'd ever heard them. I turned back to see who was walking up, even though I felt certain the leather belonged to Judge Henderson. Loafers. Italian and expensive. "Morning, Miss Charlene. Miss Delilah." His voice sounded like chocolate mousse in crystal. Judge Lyle Henderson's expression looked like he'd died and gone to heaven. He grinned for land's sake, but his face had turned beet red, as if he'd run a mile. Didn't make sense, the man being a long-distance runner and all. Since he is the local Cary Grant with his suntan, shiny eyes, and chin dimple, Charlene Higginbottom's bosom puffed up, reminding me of Harry's prize-winning chickens, the ones our neighbors complained about. Wouldn't you know our neighbor was none other than the mayor's fussy sister? Eventually, Higginbottom had a new ordinance drawn. Police came with a warrant and practically arrested those bantams. Then Harry started writing poems about the whole thing. That was what won the Pulitzer. His poems about the legal hassles with his birds. "Would you excuse us, Charlene?" The judge removed Charlene's tentacles from my arm. I rubbed where her fingers had left a mark. Glad no one could see my eyes, which had gone squinty. She was right to grab a hold of me because I was about to take off at a gallop. The judge kept my other hand in his. We eased down the street. I don't know what came over me, but I went as docile as a lamb. "I've been meaning to have a chat with you." He spoke in a baritone that gave most women palpitations. "About?" I knew good and well I hadn't returned his 5 phone calls. "Your promise." "Oh!" I swallowed, buying time. "There is a bet between Harry and the mayor." He stared intently into my eyes. "I held the wager. Harry said that if you'd walk down the street in your beautiful summer dress, the mayor would have to erect a statue. You won the moment you stepped out of the door. So now Harry's monument to those chickens of his goes up in the town square, with Mayor Higginbottom breaking the champagne bottle." I would have clapped my hands, except he was locked on to one of them. "And you, Miss Delilah, are having brunch with me." I eased my hand away, because I didn't like the sound of that. "I don't think Harry would approve." "I have it in writing." The judge touched the place above his heart. "A poem in Harry's hand." Judge Henderson alarmed me because he was holding a poem by Harry I hadn't seen. I wasn't about to play tug-of-war in front of Tolliver's Hardware with Big Ike Mitchell lounging on the bench by the sidewalk. I walked sedately. The judge slowed down so I could maneuver in the floozy dress. By 9:30, we walked into the Chicken Coop diner. It was the place to eat if you went to town. I hesitated at the entrance, but the judge put a hand on my back, gently shoving me through the door. Chapter 2. Beth Ann Tate looked up from pouring Sheriff Bellows' coffee. Her eyes widened, as if she saw that actor who once ran naked through the town sprinting by all over again. She spilled the rest of the fresh roasted coffee all over the counter. Heads turned. The judge kept moving with me right beside him. "Lovely day," he said in his courtroom voice as he waved to the patrons. "Good to see you, Tom, Eddie, Doc." He walked me past the large ceramic rooster by the cash register, then along the red Formica counter. The chicken coop had a country motif. Chicken wire, oil paintings of chickens, with Harry's poems interspersed, all tastefully hung. At the coop, they served breakfast and lunch, their specialty being the best fried chicken in 4 counties. My stomach rumbled with hunger. I'd been so nervous about the stroll, I'd forgotten to eat my Raisin Bran. The judge parked me genteelly into a booth far from anyone else. It was his and Harry's favorite. He leaned over the slick red formica and whispered, "This was the first place on Harry's list." The judge looked like a man too pleased with himself. "What?" "Ah." His blue eyes closed briefly. When they opened, his lips turned up, looking sneaky. "You don't know, do you?" "Know what?" I slid my sunglasses down to the bridge of my nose, puckering my brow with suspicion. "Harry made a list of where I was to take you on our dates." "We're not dating," I almost shouted, then covered my lips with a hand, which I finally untangled from his. I plopped my glasses onto the table, leaning closer to him. "Let's get a few things straight. I only came in here to get out of the sun." Which wasn't the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. I went in because I couldn't bear the thought of going past Inman's furniture store. I perspired just thinking about it. I fanned myself with the red checkered paper napkin, making the silverware clink and clatter on the table. Earl Inman had shown up at Harry's service in a somber gray suit with a flamingo pink shirt. Who wore such a thing to a funeral? In the reception line, his eyes wandered over me. First high, then low. I stomped on his toes hard, then watched him limp off. His eyes stayed glued on me, however, until the preacher escorted him out the door. Beth Ann sashayed over, her hips moving like a gyroscope. Beth Ann had the weathered face and calloused fingers of someone who knew the word work up close. With a stainless steel pot in one hand, 2 mugs in the other, and the menus under her elbow, she looked a mite burdened. She winked at me as she slid the red and black menus across the table. Staring up from the cover was a parade of chickens. Big and little chickens crawled across the front and each page, ending with the large one on the back side. Once a month, the town council met for lunch in the back room, where the mayor paged through the menu. Harry had found it satisfying. "Coffee?" she asked, as if we were anybody else but a famous judge and a poet's widow. "Yes, thank you." I used the voice Harry had always called overly polite. Beth Ann leisurely positioned the white mugs with a rooster's silhouette on the table. She poured the coffee in a thin waterfall. Her feet were planted, ears cocked. "Miss Delilah, what is your pleasure?" Judge Henderson canted his head left and curved his lips. "1 eggs Benedict with homemade hollandaise will suit me fine." My mouth almost watered in anticipation. Carter McDougal, the owner-chef at the chicken coop, knew his sauces, and sauces were my downfall. I'd offered to pay Carter for a lesson or 2, but he always made excuses. Nothing I said could manipulate Carter into letting me into his kitchen sanctuary. Instead, I came in once a month for breakfast. On a slow Wednesday a couple years back, Carter stood with a hand on his left hip, waggling his stirring spoon in my direction. "You wouldn't be coming in here for my fancy hollandaise and béarnaise sauces if'n you could fix 'em yourself," he said. I'd laughed until I saw Charlene and Mayor Higginbottom. The mayor had laid down a miserly tip, right in front of the poster from his missionary sister-in-law begging for money. Carter studied the handful of coins spinning on the counter by the register, then let his down-turned lips do his talking. You could feel the heat building, and it wasn't from the fryer. The Higginbottoms were within earshot, which Carter noted with a tight smile. "You brighten up the place, Miss Delilah," he went on, "and Lord knows this town needs a little lightening up and generosity." His comments and stiff stare at the mayor's miserly tip didn't endear me to the Higginbottoms, and that was a fact. I chewed on my lip at the memory as Beth Ann extracted a pencil out of her apron and pulled a pad from her breast pocket to write our order. She wore her red gingham uniform with black banded short sleeves, as though she'd starched it that morning. She wasn't stiff or formal, though, only her uniform. I reckon she was lonely, living out on the farm after her man passed from liver disease. Maybe for therapy she took her time ironing, heavy on the spray starch. "The eggs Benedict comes with fruit on the side and fried potatoes," Beth Ann said in her heavy drawl, interrupting my imagination. She hailed from Mississippi. Her words sounded dark chocolate decadent. "The fruit and a coffee," I added in my mountain twang. "Hold the potatoes." Mama always said fried food made your brain sluggish. I didn't need extra calories either, especially since I planned to devour that hollandaise sauce. And what with sitting around for months jabbering with strangers wearing white uniforms while Harry eased out of this life, things had gotten a little snug. Beth Ann nodded, then slid her hips over toward the judge, sort of like she was doing the hula. "And what can I get for you, Judge Henderson?" she asked in a voice that, in my thinking, wasn't referring to the food. Judge Henderson kept his gaze on the menu and said he'd have 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, and a small glass of orange juice. "You can throw in Miss Delilah's fried potatoes, too," he added. "You get them as well." Beth Ann's voice went all breathy. "Well, double it then. I'm running in the half marathon in Louisville soon." Which I knew was a lie, since he'd done it in May. Not that I was surprised. Lawyers are paid to lie. Beth Ann patted her blonde bun, then poked the pencil behind her ear. "Oh!" she exclaimed, as she backed away from the table. The judge flustered Beth Ann, who managed the sheriff, the mayor, and assorted dignitaries with ease. I glanced at the judge. "I thought the half marathon was run before June." "I enjoy fried potatoes," he said with a grin. "I'm going to take yours home in a doggy bag and have them tomorrow." I knew he did all of his own cooking because over the years his 2 boys had complained about the concoctions they had to eat. I thought they were finagling for dinner. I'd set 2, sometimes 3 extra places, then give the judge's secretary a call. We were finishing breakfast when Madison, the FBI special agent from Lexington, came in. I recognized him because he showed up on a case that made national news, the kidnapping of the Sheik's racehorse. Although I'm not sure if it's a kidnapping when the victim is a horse. Perhaps we should call it a horse-napping. Madison plopped on a stool beside the sheriff, still sitting at the counter, and they had quite a conversation, their heads bobbing similar to those plastic dolls people put on their car dashboards. In a few minutes, both put down their coffee mugs, then aimed their eyes our direction. I could see them plain because I was facing the front of the diner. The judge's eyes were elsewhere. It made me think something wasn't right. But the judge was in such a nostalgic mood, I didn't point out their interest. They slid out of their seats, paid the bill, and left in a hurry, heading toward the courthouse. After breakfast, we stopped to pick up eye drops at the pharmacy, which was the farthest distance in my promise to Harry. I took my change, then reached for my eye drops. The judge tucked them into his pocket and extended an elbow for me to grab. "I'll walk you home," he said. I grabbed a deep breath. So much for home lickety-split. He paraded me down Main Street. "If we scoot along, Harrison, then meander down Duncan's alley, we'll miss the traffic." I hoped to avoid extra encounters with my neighbors. "Heads up, eyes front." He grinned. I suspect he took my hand again to keep me from bolting. "When do I get to see Harry's poem?" I asked as we turned the corner to Washington again.
"I'll show you his letters and the poem when it's appropriate."
"And you decide the when, I gather?" I was a little steamed, my voice edgy.
"No, Harry has dates on them," he said quietly. "That's when I'm to show them to you."
Well, that shut me up nice and proper. We walked along the sidewalk past the ice cream parlor near the college. Even a fake fruity ice cream cone painted in soft pink and brown looked inviting.
"Not yet," said the judge, as he watched me study the lettering on the poster. "We'll stop on our second date."
The man sure talked presumptuous. I wanted to straighten out a thing or two, but our conversation wasn't for public consumption. I needed to wait until we were in a more private place. In some sophisticated city, I could invite the judge into the house to have a talk. Heaven knows in our small town I couldn't, especially with my widow status. A half a block later, we found ourselves amid the venerable brick and mortar of Boone College. The first house on our right was the president's, Federalist in design and surrounded by large floral gardens terraced up the hillside. The president's wife, Mrs. Benson, kneeled amongst her David Austin imports. She saw us, waved her clippers, then eased on to her feet. The house was on a slight rise, and she was aiming to walk over the berm instead of down the drive.
"Uh-oh,"
I murmured.
"Courage,"
said the judge. He walked over, offered his arm to stabilize her scrawny little legs. It was a gallant gesture. The knight waiting on the queen herself. Mrs. Benson dimpled up. The judge didn't squire around women like a playboy, but he knew how to treat a lady, and Mrs. Benson was a lady who hailed all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina. We got along fine, too, but she was a sympathetic person. I'll wrap arms around, then pat your back. In parting, Mrs. Benson pecked me on both cheeks. I saw the judge turn away and blow his nose on the handkerchief from his pocket. She walked back to her roses, the judge playing escort. He skirted down the hillside around the cabbage roses, and we took off, aiming toward the shade trees along the sidewalk. We only had to go around the corner, then the 3 blocks to my drive. Maybe I could make it that far. It wasn't only that my feet were throbbing from the sling-back heels. It was the emotions blending around like berries for a fruit smoothie. The judge and I talked about the kids, his 2 and my 4. I managed not to bring up the covert interest the sheriff and FBI special agent had shown earlier in the judge. Dogs are an essential conversation topic in our neck of the woods, so I broached it. Everyone knew the judge loved dogs, and that he had a new puppy. This time his dog was what Harry called a lady's dog, a fuzzy Shih Tzu. "How are you doing with the dog training?" I asked, as our feet concussed the cement.
"Bartles is an exceptional dog."
His chest swelled.
"He rings a bell to tell me it's time to do his duty."
I laughed. What a relief to laugh after the crazy morning. Since Harry's death, my emotions are in lockdown. Only time I remembered laughing over the past few weeks had been with my young grandson, Austin. Funny name for a dog.
I always wanted an English butler. This is as close as I can get.
The judge swung his jacket over his shoulder, holding it with 2 fingers as if it were air. I limped from my unaccustomed hike in party shoes. I hadn't wiggled into pantyhose, so I stepped out of my shoes. Good thing the trees kept the sidewalks shaded so my feet didn't burn. Only a fool wore pantyhose on a 90-degree day with the air so thick moisture drooled down the back. The judge smiled at my orange-polished nails, and we went on, me skirting the sticks on the sidewalk, the judge still talking about his dog. Next door to my Queen Anne Victorian, George Salis sprawled in his lounge chair, wearing little else but an undershirt, Bermuda shorts, and a pair of flip-flops. The garden hose in his hand spurted out water in a casual arc. You'd think George would have something else to do than sit for hours letting water squirt out into the yard. 20 minutes in one spot suited him. I'd timed his rotation one day while sitting and watching Harry breathe. George waggled his hose at us. We waved back, dodging the water droplets plopping onto the sidewalk near our feet. George gave us another wave, this time aiming the hose toward his house, when his wife Mamie stepped onto the veranda. I don't think he saw her, but she got a face full of cold water. She hollered loud as a contrary bull, then scooted back indoors before he could do more damage.